This is the Retirement Planning University podcast with Jordan Schwartz and Phillis Pulvinas.
Welcome back to the Retirement Planning University podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Schwartz. I'm joined here with my co-host, Phillis. You just had a little bit of time off, didn't you?
I did. It might have made me lazy, but no, charge my batteries and I'm back. I'm gonna take you on in a contest to see who can work more. I'm batteries charged, ready to rock.
Cool. We got a great topic for today. And the topic, I think, is something that probably, what is it, Phillis? I think 20,000 people every day in America are retiring. I've heard that before. Have you heard that before?
I thought I heard 10, but a lot. Let's put it that way. Yeah, every day.
And what's so interesting, we've talked about this before, there's kind of two distinct phases for retirement, right? There's the accumulation phase where you're building and the distribution phase when you're taking money out of the account to generate income. And one of the biggest questions that I get is whenever it comes to really having an advisor, but more importantly, how much does an advisor cost and what should that relationship look like? So we're going to dive into the nitty gritty and really give you a 10,000 foot bird's eye view, but then dive into that too. Phillis, when you think about it, the accumulation phase is when you're building a pile of money. I don't really think someone needs an advisor necessarily during that period of time.
Yeah, maybe just some initial guidance to figure out these are your goals. This is how much you need to save to get there. But really, if you're just a disciplined saver, you put away money and you go after growth, it's hard to do bad. It's hard to do it wrong. But the next phase is totally different.
If I'm someone and I'm thinking, okay, how do I know if I'm between the accumulation versus distribution? I look at it like you're within 5 to 10 years from retirement. Maybe let's talk about that a little bit too, Phillis. How much do you think an advisor for everything all in? Because that's the issue here. Some advisors will tell you what their fees are, but they don't tell you what the fees of the investments are, the fees for the planning. How much do you think an advisor should be all in? And how can we protect the consumer from falling into the trap that I think thousands, if not millions of Americans have fallen into?
Oh, you really want to get me excited here, right? Get me started. Yeah. Let me say it loud and clear. First of all, the distribution phase, the next, right before you retire or in retirement, your needs, your goals, everything is entirely different from the accumulation phase. Mm-hmm. The planning around the investments are just as important. But to answer your question, all in, all that kind of holistic advice, investment advice, really for the overall plan should be more than one per year. Some pieces are going to be more expensive. Some pieces are going to be less, but all in 1%. And people may not know it, but most people that we see are paying a lot more, and you're just giving away your hard-earned dollars.
Phil, here's a question, because I've met with people, a lot of people in my career, who have said, oh, my advisor says they're 0.75 or 0.85 or 1.2 or whatever that is. But oftentimes, there's these hidden fees that the client has no idea is even there. And sometimes the advisor may not be aware that they're there. How can someone protect themselves, or what sort of questions can they ask to make sure they don't fall victim to that?
Yeah, and really where you're going to see the hidden fees are in things like variable annuities and mutual funds. Okay, there's a reason that 82% of the time these mutual funds underperform indexes that they're designed to beat. And that's because of the internal fees. And you're right, sometimes the advisors actually don't know these fees. What you've got to be really clear on in asking your advisor, if you want to get to the bottom of it, as I know what your fees are, but inside these mutual funds, inside this variable annuity, are there any other costs that come out before I get my return? And if they say it emphatically, sheesh, I guess you got to believe them, but I'd ask them again. And really, because think about it, there's no mutual fund that doesn't have any costs to it.
And sometimes it's important to listen to what's not being said, right?
True.
Oftentimes when you're having a conversation with someone about fees, they say, oh yeah, my fees are this or my fees are that. If you hear the question I would encourage you to ask is, what is the entire cost of the overall strategy?
Yeah.
That is as clear as a bell. And if you start hearing a lot of gibberish or they're deflecting or you're not getting a clear answer, From my perspective, that's a red flag, right? Someone should be able to tell you clearly and simply what the fee structure is. And if they're not, Phil, you think that's a red flag? I do.
That's a huge red flag. And whether it's almost scary if they don't know. They're advising you. What else don't they know? Yeah, that's a huge red flag because it all adds up. And most people, when the market's good, they're cruising along and their advisor walks on water. Everything's great. But boy, those fees add up, especially in a down market. So yeah, sometimes you need to guide the advisor a little bit and saying, look, I know what you're getting paid, but all in the mutual fund to manage that. Are there additional costs? What about every time they trade in there? What are the costs? And if they cannot give you a straightforward answer, that's a huge red flag.
Think of it like this, to your point, right? If the market's up 10% a year and you're paying 2% per year in fees, you earn 8. But if the market's down by 10% and you're paying 2% per year in fees, you lose 12, right? So those fees, in essence, act as an anchor. And what happens is for retirees, when you are nearing retirement, the impact of fees and risk and withdrawals from the portfolio can be devastating to someone's portfolio. But I think it's important to note here, Phil, there are 3 different ways that advisors charge fees, right? There's 3 different ways on how an advisor would cost you or what that would look like. There's fee only, there's fee based, and then there's commission based.
Absolutely. So fee only, I can see that's where you go to the advisor and you say, please build me a plan. Tell me what I need to do to be successful.
And then you would do that as the consumer, as opposed to having the advisor do that for you.
Yes. Generally, you're going to implement it yourself.
So maybe talk about what about the pros and cons of that? So what's good about that? What do you think's bad about that?
If you're in the accumulation phase, that might be okay. And then you go off and you buy cheap, no load funds or do your 401k. You just need to save and grow. And you need to know how much to save and where to save it. So that could work. But when you're in the distribution phase, with all the things that you've learned throughout your life start changing, you've got to look at things differently. Mm-hmm. You throw out all the old rules. That's where it can get scary. I'm not saying it's impossible, but there are a lot of things that you need to think about, that you need to consider, that you need to do. And if you get a plan for somebody, I am inclined not to want to do it for people. I love to help people. But the reason is if I give somebody 6 things to do and they do 4, they fail and I fail. Mm-hmm. It's not impactful. So I don't like it in the distribution phase or the second phase of planning, if you will.
So a pro could be, this is probably the least expensive of.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
And also too, for someone who maybe wants to have a little bit more control over their retirement planning and they want to do it on their own, that's a pro of it as well. It allows you to do it. The con from my perspective is, one, how active is someone going to follow through in making sure all these things are getting done correctly? That's a big one. And I think a con is also too, you see a lot of people who do their own investments, they can make really bad decisions for themselves. And sometimes I think having an advisor as that partner can make sense. So maybe if we're looking at this option, there's pros and cons for the consumer. There's also pros and cons for the advisor. Phil, to your point, if you do this type of planning for someone and you give them 10 things to do and they do 4 of them and they come back to you and say it didn't work, I wonder why. Really, with this type of planning, I feel as an advisor, I'm not able to make as big of an impact on someone's retirement as I can if I have a hand on the wheel of the car versus I'm basically just giving them a map to follow, because I don't know if they're going to follow that map correctly. But if I know I'm in that car, I know I'm going to be able to help steer them in the right direction.
That's exactly right. And a lot of times people don't want that relationships because they're afraid that the advisor is going to run away doing things and they're not going to explain it. To be candid, you need an advisor who's going to educate you so that, you can really sit on the same side of the table, or like your analogy with driving the car, maybe the client is driving the car, but the financial advisor is the GPS.
Yeah, whatever that is. So that's the first way is fee only. And then you have fee based. And that one is when you would you'd choose an advisor, you'd build a strategy with them, and then they would charge you a fee or a percentage of what's called assets under management, what they're basically managing the money for on your behalf. And then they would charge you a percentage fee of those assets. Phil, this is obviously not a complete strategy because this is just managing a portfolio. And one of the bigger issues, I think, we're going to talk about in a minute is what should the relationship look like. But this one, they charge a fee, a percentage of assets under management. What do you think some of the pros and maybe some of the cons with this are?
Well, some of the pros that people like is if the portfolio makes money, the advisor makes more. If the portfolio goes down, the advisor makes less. So that seems intuitively a lot more fair than if a commission's being charged. So that's
a line.
Yeah.
And then maybe some of the cons would be it can be more expensive whenever you're working with someone to do that. But you do give up some of the control. But my personal opinion is that giving up control could be a pro to some people and a con to some people. Someone who is a little bit more self-directed is not going to like that. But for someone who's, I've got no interest in doing this, I need a professional to do this because I could ruin my retirement. I think it's a pro or a con, depending on how you look at it. And then the third one is commission-based. And Phyllis, I think we need to break up some of the misconceptions, because sometimes when people hear commission-based products, they associate them with something bad, and that's not the case.
Yeah, I could go a little nuts on this one, Jordan.
Let's do it.
Yeah, if we're doing a holistic plan for retirees, there are some really, in certain instances, not for everybody, not all the time, but there are some commission-based products. That's the only way that we can utilize them, whether it be the right type of annuity. And by the way, I don't like most annuities. I like some in certain instances. Life insurance, they're commission-based. And oftentimes in a particular situation, that's necessary. So I'll get paid a commission on that. But I always view, I'm a fiduciary. I'm going to suggest that because in the overall plan, that makes sense. But the key is, if all the advisor can do is charge a commission, if that's the only way they can get paid, then you really want to run for cover. Because now they just don't have all the tools in the toolbox for you. And you want somebody who can work in all three capacities, quite frankly, and then help you to understand in your situation what's best for you and why. If they can't make you do that and they can't work in all capacities, that's a big red flag.
So I think maybe the best answer for this is probably having a blended approach. Someone you work with can operate in these different environments so that you can really get a customized strategy relative to what you need. Now, one question I've got too, and I think this is where a lot of people will get themselves into trouble, is that oftentimes many advisors' fees will just be for the management of the assets. But there's a big difference between a holistic planning advisor and then a money manager who charges fees, right? That distinction, to me, I think is everything.
It's radical. Yeah, it's radical difference. Yeah,
totally. Because what that relationship should look like is not just someone managing the money. That's a part of it. There's all the other stuff included as well.
Yeah, they've got to help you with the right allocation for your situation. Set up an income plan. You've got to have a plan for when to take your Social Security. You've got to have a tax strategy. You've got to understand how to get leverage for your long-term care, for your Medicare. There's so much more, and this is the big distinction. I meet really smart people who've done a great job saving for retirement, and they know a lot about investments, but more times than not, that's not enough to make them successful in retirement. That holistic planning, all of those other pieces that I just mentioned in conjunction with the right types of investments is the key to a successful retirement, in my humble opinion, Jordan.
So there's kind of two types of planning, right? There is the allocation planning, which is what most advisors focus on, which is the money management of the strategy. The bigger thing that we're looking for is the holistic planning, which is basically all the things you just mentioned, helping build a comprehensive retirement income plan for someone where they can navigate how to plan for Social Security, if they've got pensions, how to integrate that, how to take distributions from their investments in the most strategic and intelligent way, making sure they're accounting for things like inflation, making sure their money's going to last as long as they do. And then also, there's tax conversion planning, right? I don't care what someone's politics are, probably going to see higher taxes in the future, right? If we have a lower tax rate now, looking at potentially doing some tax conversions. And then also, I think, leveraging a long-term care strategy, making sure that someone's got a Medicare plan, that their estate planning is in order, that they're doing all those different things. And Phyllis, I look at it like this. Okay, a money manager focuses on the financial house, and you can have the best financial house ever. But if you don't put a fence around that financial house, with holistic planning, you're going to have burglaries and thefts and robberies because you haven't protected your kingdom. You haven't protected your home. And to me, if you're trying to evaluate, first, you got to figure out how much does the advisor actually cost? And if you're not getting a clear answer, I think that's a red flag. But also, I think what goes into this is you should be understanding, what are you paying for? What are the services that are included? Because oftentimes it's just for the money management. And then if you want to talk to someone about Medicare, there's a fee to talk to someone like that. Or you've got to be outsourced to a third-party company that they know that may not have the same quality or expertise as the advisor that you're working with. I think it's looking at all those different things to make sure not only are you paying a reasonable amount, but are you getting proportional value for what you're actually paying?
That's well said. One of the biggest things that I worry about for people who are close to retirement is they don't know what they don't know. They don't know that this next phase, I can't say it enough, is radically different than what you needed to get to the point that you're close to retirement. The holistic planning, all of those other aspects are of equal importance as to the performance of your investments. And in some places, I could argue even more important.
I would too. I think what happens when you're in the accumulation phase, it's product first, product second, plan third. When you're in the distribution phase, it's plan first. You know when you can retire, product second, plan third, right? So it's interesting to me because I think what happens for a lot of people, Phil, is that they start moving into the distribution phase, but their planning, their advisor is still very much focused on the accumulation phase, and they wonder why it doesn't work, right?
Yeah, they don't know what they don't know. I've met brilliant people. They know about their investments. They know what they've made. They can talk sensibly about that, but they don't know that they got a ticking tax bomb. They don't know where to take the money from when, for what reason. They don't know how to integrate that decision about Social Security into the whole picture. They just never had to deal with that.
If I'm listening to this right now, I'm taking away probably two main things. Number one would be, I got to ask someone and get a real clear answer on what the fees are. I got to know that. And if I'm not getting a clear answer, I got to dig, I got to ask more questions because that might not be the whole picture. Absolutely. But the second thing I think that you and I are talking about right now is I need to understand the level of planning. If I'm choosing an advisor, if I'm working with an advisor, the level of planning that is going to go into what they're actually doing, and is that proportionally worth the cost? Where I think that's super helpful, Phil. I really like that. I think that's very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's understanding this phase of life. What are all the things you need to consider? And is that advisor able to do that for you? Are they doing that? What are you getting for your buck?
And if they're not, may need to reconsider who you're working with.
Yeah, it's just a general practitioner is not going to do heart surgery for you.
And if they do, that's probably not going to go very well.
Yeah, let's hope they don't do it, right?
Let's hope they don't, yeah.
You've been listening to the RPU Podcast with Jordan Schwartz and Phillis Polvinas.